Hi, I'm Jillybean Fitzhenry, and this project, Majestic Bald Eagle, was originally taught as a Zoom class. The pattern packet with instructions, pattern, and step-by-step photos is available on my website, jillybean.net, as well as all the brushes. Hope you enjoy. All right, so let's take a look at the feathers on the original one here. Okay, so this lower section on the right, it's more whitish, allowing the background to show through. The upper part here and off to the left has more of the brown tone to it. Um, and so we're just going to kind of make a transition going across there to begin with. But we can actually, I'm pretty sure yeah, I did. I started with kind of all the same color to get the edges. So we want like an off-white color. Let me see what I did use originally. Let's see, photo number 7, medium white, um, which is white plus a touch of burnt umber and maybe a little touch of yellow. Um, if you have traditions, the medium white works good. Another color would be, let's see, in Americana, you could use bleach sand would be a good one. Um, oyster beige would be good. Desert sand would be good. Anything that's just kind of an off-white. You just don't want a pure white. Okay, now here's the deal. This off-white color, the medium white, it's going to go on the tips of all the feathers, and the edges are smooth. They're not raggedy like you would see in other feathers. So they all come together in a smooth. So you could actually even outline them after. Okay, so you don't need to see the tips of the feathers. You're going to see them inside. Okay, and then we'll put a little vein going down the middle of any of the bigger ones. Okay. So all these feathers are all done exactly the same. So I'm going to thin down with some water. Okay, and I'll just pick one here. I'll do a big one. Okay, so here's my center vein. And I'm just going to pull in from the outside, but leave some color showing. You don't have to attach them to the center vein. And you do that on both sides of the feather. So that's what you need to do to every feather. Okay? So all of the feathers are you're just going to pull from the outside to the center. Not all of them you can see, the whole thing. So you might just be pulling from one side. And just kind of use your, pictures as a reference. Eventually we'll be covering up those graphite lines. You still want to see some of your pretty colors showing through. And some of these feathers will actually get an outlined highlight on the edge because they're not left rough like you would do in other things. The edges of their feathers come together very, very smoothly. So we'll do that with an outline after. This part is just kind of roughed in, and then each step after we refine it more and more. And the ones at the very bottom, eventually, if we have to, we can put little washes of color over to make them blend in better, you know, with the bottom of our surface here. Now most of this gets covered up, so I'm not real worried if it's not perfect strokes with this color. So I'll go a little bit faster with this one, but then I'll slow down when I do my other colors. And we'll strengthen those tips later too. This is just the roughing in stage. It's like you're undercoating just to get a little bit of more dimension in the feathers, but don't want to lose all our pretty color under there too. Could always come back and add more if we needed to, but and at the bottom, if you can just add some roughed in little strokes, they don't even have to look like they belong to a feather necessarily. It's going to help it transition into your color. So you're just going to add, you know, just some little roughed strokes down in, and it'll just look like it's disappearing into the color. So we don't want to be able to see any definite stopping point on those bottom feathers. We want it to look like it's just all fading in to the picture. So just a few little roughed in strokes here and there. There, and I'm going to turn mine sideways so that you can see more of the picture here. So you might have to get out a little bit. And then I'll zoom in when we do more detail again. But I'm just going to leave mine as is for now. You can see a lot of my background still showing through. I don't have perfect strokes by any means, you know, on the feathers. It's just roughed in just to get some color in there. And this color will fade. You're not going to even see a whole lot of this when we get more done. So anything that you're worried about right now probably is all going to disappear. And we'll be a little bit more refined each step along the way, but this one does not need a lot. Okay, now you're going to notice that on your step-by-step, I skipped step number 6 on purpose. Okay, I found it was much easier just to go ahead and do this stage first, all the feathers the same color. Then I'll go back and do my shading in there. But I was jumping around too much. But when you're designing something, sometimes you do that. So we'll go back after and we'll separate these feathers a little bit better with some shadows. And we may even decide to use some of the color that's underneath to add shadows with, instead of just all brown. So like on stage number 8, I went back and I snuck in some, you know, of that other color in there as well. But we'll get those more refined after. So just take your time. We have plenty of time to get this stage done. And just see if you can get it to fade towards the bottom of your picture. Just add some little random strokes with this color down towards the bottom here, so they don't even need to be a feather later, but the color will just kind of gradually pull your eye down. Okay, now I'm going to zoom in just so you can see that mine is rougher too. You saw the big picture. Now let me zoom in so you can see that I don't have perfect strokes. It's just really just kind of roughed in. All right, let's take out some burnt umber and use an angle brush, or if you're used to using a corner load on a flat, you can certainly do that too. I just love angle brushes, so it's just always easy to explain load the long tip. Okay, and we're going to be using the paint thin down. You know, we want it to be transparent. We don't want to totally cover everything up. And what we're going to do is we're going to kind of use step number 6 now for our reference. So what we want to do is we want to add shadow to separate the different feathers. And then we're also going to separate underneath the head. We want to get some shadow up under there. But we want to do mostly across the top and then down the left side, where we don't really want a lot of brown in that bottom right corner of those feathers. So somewhere in between here, we want to kind of stop. And then if we need more shadow, we're going to do it with colors instead. I would do it with like the blue in this area or the pink in the other area. So I would use some of the background color that's showing through to help get extra shadows after. So we'll start with the burnt umber. Now, you have a couple choices. Some people find it easier to moisten the surface a little bit. and others like to use it dry. Um, test a little area. So if I test a little area off here, I'm just going to wet. Okay, and then I'm going to re-dip my brush, blot it once on a paper towel. Okay, so then a little tiny corner load, you know, and wipe most of that off, but just keep it on that one side of the brush, but you want it transparent. Okay, so I'm going to use to separate, and it doesn't matter, and I'm going to do it more choppy rather than a smooth float. Okay, it'll give it more of a feathery look. So rather than going zoop right up the side, I'm copying it in a little bit. Does that make sense? Hopefully. So just kind of chop it between. And when I chop it, I kind of do it in the direction that the feathers would be anyway. So see, that kind of gives me little feathery strokes at the same time. Okay, so wherever you just want to separate all of your, so I'm going under, separate all of your feathers, and I'm just kind of chopping in with my angle brush. And I'm also going to want to chop in underneath the head area. And maybe that makes more sense to do that first. So I'm using the chisel edge of the brush. So it's not a typical float, okay, but it's a corner load. And then I'm chopping it in because that'll keep it more feathery looking. So we're going to do this wherever the feathers are touching each other. And underneath the head. And try it, moistening or not moistening. I actually kind of liked moistening. So I think I'm gonna, and you could have your big 1-inch brush handy to moisten the area. I'm just going to use some water and moisten that. I think that did help a little bit. So I'm going to go all the way under, all the way across under the head. Chop that in. I need that dark in order for that white to show up afterwards. We'll be making some nice bright white tips under there after. Okay, another little option too, if you're having trouble with this little chisel kind of float, another option would be go ahead and pull along the edge and then chop. Okay, so if it's easier for you to float the color along the edge, then come back and chop the color a little bit. You can do that too. I want you to just make it as easy as possible for yourself. Okay, now, as I get closer to the bottom, I'm going to want to start to fade it out a little bit so that I don't have a real abrupt stopping point with the separation of these feathers. So I'm going to do just a little bit less. And keep kind of getting back away from it and looking, so that you can see your lights and darks. We're too close, as we're working on it. So you got to kind of get back away from it every so often. Now I can show you just one feather what the next step will be. That might help you decide that you're actually doing okay. Let me show you that. And these feathers all look pretty rough, but what we'll be doing is taking some of the medium white. Oh, here I am. Water. Okay. And what we can actually outline those feathers. So those bottom tips, okay? And I'll just pull in some lines from that to help transition it a little better. And so that's going to help us clean up these feathers and redefine them. But I do use the liner brush because the other one is just a little bit too thick. So I would outline it, pull some little medium white lines in, and then eventually some of the feathers are going to get just on the one side. They're going to get a brighter white line for a highlight. Okay. And then we're still going to tint them after. Some will get tinted with colors from the background. Some will get tinted with some burnt sienna. So we'll be playing with that, but each feather will get cleaned up. So whenever you're ready, medium white, outline the edges of the feathers, add center veins where it's a full feather, and pull some little individual lines in from the edge. Some of them you might find that it looks like you've got enough of the medium white lines going in. So you don't always need to do every single one, but it's an option to break it up. But this will help refine the edges of your feathers. Any graphite lines, this will help cover up graphite lines. And even the feathers that you didn't do the shading on that, left or the right bottom side, go ahead and outline those. This will help to cover up my graphite lines now. And any of the areas you're not sure if there should be a center vein, Sometimes it's easier, just go ahead, do all the outlining first, then take a look. If it's a great big fat one, chances are it needs a center vein. But that bottom right side, that's got some brighter white feathers on it. So you can kind of see that in photo number 8 is where we'll do the brighter white. And the brighter white, when you do that, maybe you can just do it with a rake. Maybe you have to come back and outline. That just depends on how much control you have over your rake brush. If I can do it with just the rake, I prefer that, but I always have the option of coming back and touching up with a liner. But then when we transition into the darker feathers on the left, we're only going to give a little bit of a white, bright white outline on the left edge of some of the feathers and just leave it at that. Now, as I'm looking at my piece, I'm going to go back and fix something. And if you're too busy to watch me, you'll be able to see it in the video later. But I just don't feel that ridge around my mouth is popping up away from him enough. So I'm going to redo that. I'm going to use a little bit more orangey color, and I'm going right over that ridge. I need that ridge to really pop up. I'm going to go with a little more of an orangey yellow. I think it's Indian yellow that I'm using. I'm going to try it one more time. Okay. And then I'm going to put a bright yellow line and then a white line. See if I can't get that to pop just a little better. So now in the middle of that, I'll put a thinner yellow and then come back with a bright white. I probably got to get that to dry a little. Okay, then I'll try my brighter white there. Because that's really a big, hard ridge around his mouth. And I think that pops a little better. Now, another thing I could have done was I could have shaded around it to pop it forward. And I still could. But I would need a little bit of, well, let's see if I use the burnt umber really, really, really careful. Tiny, tiny bit. I'll just float that under that ridge. That helps. So if you'd like to do just the bottom tips of where our head is with some bright white, we'll get those refined little tips. That'll help too. You know, that helps pull it together to see where you're at. And those I do just do with a liner brush also. I want some really strong white tips. So just adding some really strong and maybe not quite so much water. It's a little bit thicker this time. So it really will pop out. And just worry about the tips, not the rest of the head. Get those to overlap on top of our brown feathers. And I kind of make them go different directions. Really some thick little tips. I really overlap those brown feathers. We'll get it to transition into the rest of the head after, but this just kind of finishes off that bottom edge. Now, if I would have used a rake brush on there to do this stage, you're not going to get the thickness that you need for the individual line. You can get thin lines, or you can get a solid area, but you can't get the fat lines that you get with the liner brush by loading it with lots of paint. So you do need to use the liner on the final detail there. I want to get bright white coming into those feathers now, and I'm going to slowly transition so I don't get too much in the brown ones. Okay, so I'll start in the bottom corner and then kind of work my way up. I'm going to use the rake brush. Okay, and I'm going to be a little more careful this time, so pull it on the edge and I'm going to pull in. All right, or I could do the other way, but I like the way that it looks when I pull away from myself, or when I pull from the outside in. I get more exaggerated ending points. When I first set the brush down, it's all going to be even. See that? So I'd rather have it uneven inside of the feather. Now, I find it easier towards myself, so typically I would turn this upside down, which is what I'm going to do, because I find it much easier to pull towards myself than away from myself. Now you just have to see what feels comfortable for you, because I know there are some people that find it easier to flick away from themselves. But I'm just going to set it carefully on the edge, pull on both sides, getting all those feathers in the bottom corner. Now, if I overlap too much, sometimes I can just take my finger and blot it if I overlap the feather above, because it's a transparent color and it's usually pretty easy to clean up. But just go a little slower. That's hard for me to do. I always want to hurry up and do it quick. So I got to slow it down. And when you're working on the watercolor paper too, a lot of times you have to do, if you're trying to get fine lines like this, you have to slow it down a little bit. So get all our brighter whites. And there again, add a few little random white strokes towards the bottom that may not actually be attaching to anything, just to help camouflage that into the bottom of your design. A few little few little flicks of the brush here and there. Okay, so now I think I've got most of my brighter white ones. Okay, I'm going to take and put just a little bit of white on the few of the first brown ones that touch where the white areas are. And maybe let's just do it on the left side. So if you can see the whole feather, just do the one side. Just a little bit so it starts to transition. I'm not going to go all the way across, but I want there to be just a little bit of white transition there. I don't know about you guys, but normally when I'm using my rake brush, every so often I need to stop and really clean it and then reload it because it seems like it gets all gunked up in that top area near the ferrule, and I need a fresh load. I feel like I have it loaded and nothing's coming off, so stop and clean it, start with a fresh load. Much better. All right, I don't want to get too much. Probably stop about there. And just add a few more little random strokes in the bottom of my picture. Tip this up here. Just a few little feathery lines that really are not even connected to a feather, but it just helps it to kind of fade in a little bit. Okay. The rest of them are just going to get a little bit of a white outline, and you don't have to do the whole thing, but I want to get a little bit stronger just on the left side of these brown, and maybe just catch that little tip, just go under the little tip with a little bit of a hook. And if you needed to do this to the white feathers, you could. But definitely want to do it on the brown ones. And that'll help clean up the edges again. So don't outline both sides, just the one side and a little bit of a hook underneath.